Ooh. Thank you all for coming. It's so nice to see so many people here. I think maybe we'll have a few more come. I personally am not introducing the speaker. I'm going to let Harvey do that because Harvey arranged for this lady to come, and we're all looking forward to this talk.
Thank you, Mary. Our speaker today is Professor Angela Bradbury. She is the Frank Carroll Endowed Chair of Public Interest Communication. She came to UF in 2020, but this is her second major visit to UF because she graduated from UF with a degree in journalism in 1986. And after that, she worked at Fort Lauderdale with the South Florida Sentinel, Palm Beach Post newspaper, and the Chicago Tribune. And after years of reporting, she went to Washington, D.C., where she ended up working for Public Citizen. Some of you may know Public Citizen is the public advocacy group noted for consumer protection, consumer issues, which was founded by Ralph Nader. And it's, according to my calculations, it's 55 years old this year, and probably one of the most influential public interest groups in Washington, D.C. Professor Bradbury not only talks the talk, but she also walks the walk, because in 2003, she co-founded a group in Washington, D.C. to get legislation to create a smoke-free workplace in Washington, D.C. And 3 years later, after her advocacy and her lobbying and her organization efforts, they were successful. So she not only talks about advocacy and public interest, she actually did it and successful. And at this point, I'll introduce you to Professor Bradbury, and she will present her presentation.
Thank you so much, Harvey. Can I get the slides up on the screen? Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Harvey. I appreciate it. It's great to see you all here. And I appreciate the invitation to come and speak. My name is Angela Bradbury. I am the Correll Chair in Public Interest Communications at the University of Florida. And I'm going to talk a little bit about public interest communications and how we can use public interest communications to get over and bridge divides. I had prepared slides for us about my background. Harvey did a wonderful job. I was born in Fort Lauderdale a long time ago when it looked like that. I attended UF. I graduated from the College of Journalism and Communications, where I teach now, with a degree in journalism. And I chose journalism because I always wanted to make positive change in the world. And I saw that as a great path. So for 10 years, I was a newspaper reporter, and I worked for the Sun Sentinel, the Palm Beach Post, and the Chicago Tribune. That was in the heyday of newspapers. And that's when the newspapers had great budgets and they competed a lot with each other. Towards the end of that 10 years was when the cracks began to form in the newspaper industry. The LA Times laid off 150 people, which was one of the first major layoffs that sent shockwaves around the newspaper industry, and newspapers started pulling back on their budgets and their investigative teams. And I found it was harder to do the kinds of stories that I had gotten into the profession for. And I thought, I'd really like to use the skills that I've learned over the past 10 years for advocacy. So I moved to Washington, D.C. and got a job at Public Citizen. And Harvey did a wonderful job of explaining Public Citizen. The idea is that big corporations have lobbyists in DC, and Public Citizen is the people's lobbyist, which meant that we worked on good government, ethical government, healthcare regulations, access to healthcare, climate change, a whole range of issues. And I was there for almost 21 years. I ran communications there. I worked with other organizations and coalitions with other communications directors on big efforts and big campaigns. As Harvey mentioned, I also co-founded Smoke Free DC, which was an all-volunteer organization that worked to get smoke-free workplaces in DC, including bars and restaurants, and that was back in the day when that was a controversial thing. And we were successful. It taught me a lot about communicating with different groups of people, communicating with lawmakers, communicating with lawmakers who disagreed with us, communicating with volunteers, communicating with bar and restaurant owners, and a lot of skills that helped me develop as a public interest communicator. And then about 5 years ago, I heard about a fabulous opportunity to come here to UF and teach public interest communications and grow our public interest communications program. So we moved here, myself and my wonderful partner, Len, who is in the audience here, was wonderful enough to leave DC and come to Gainesville. During the pandemic, we moved in August 2020, and this is a picture shortly about, a couple weeks after we got here, we walked over to the college, and it was the first time I'd been back to the college since I'd left Gainesville and had graduated, and it was really wonderful to be back, and I love teaching. We've been growing the program, and I'll tell you a little bit about that a little later. So, what is public interest communications? I like to, before I give you kind of the formal definition, tell you a story that helps show what public interest communications is. Carlton Ward Jr. is a wildlife photographer, and Tom Hochter is an ecologist at the University of Florida. And about more than a decade ago, they were looking at GPS data, and they realized that black bears were using a patchwork of public land and private land to move around, especially in the Everglades area. And they realized that if the black bear was doing that, then probably the Florida panther was as well. And they were particularly concerned about the Florida panther because it was endangered. And Florida panther needs a range of about 200 miles to thrive. If it's cut off by development, if it's cut off by roads, it can't mate, it can't thrive, it can't do what it needs to do, and eventually a species will die. So they got together and they formed the Florida Wildlife Corridor Project. Have any of you heard of this? Okay, all right, great. So you know how this is going. So they spent a while putting together, and they have this map showing here are the lands that we need to preserve. They were very concerned about preserving those, especially the private land, because they knew that the private land could be sold off. So they put together a proposal for the Florida legislature, and they asked the Florida legislature to please buy and put money towards preserving this land. Hundreds of millions of dollars, millions of acres. That's a tall ask, right? In a state where the economic engine is development. You're taking out of commission all this land for development. Well, they worked with National Geographic to put together this documentary, and I'm going to play just a few minutes of it. And then I'd love to just hear your impressions of what stands out to you. So what jumped out to you from a communications perspective about that? Anything? Yes.
that how some of those corridors were really thin and very small. And they went a long distance. How will you see the animals in that corridor safe and still thriving?
Well, they taught, thanks, Don. They, what they presented, which the corridor, which was good, but they made it inclusive. They didn't go by section of the state. They made it the responsibility of the entire state and all the people living in it. So they spoke to the entire population of Florida, not just to Broward County or Lee County or Collier County, but they talked to all of us to say that we're all part of this by showing the entire corridor and how it connects together.
Right. That's a great observation, right? It's a statewide issue. Anything else? Yes. Yes. Okay. All right. The public-private partnership, definitely.
Necessary
Right. Right.
for your proposal.
For the, exactly. The voices that were amplified were the voices of ranchers, right? The message was about the Florida way of life. And after this film was put together, the Florida Wildlife Corridor people took it to Tallahassee. They sat lawmakers down, they showed it to lawmakers. And then this was in 2021, there was a vote on the Florida Wildlife Corridor and the proposal to put all this money towards it. And those of you who are familiar probably know, how did the vote go? Thumbs up, right, it passed. Do you know what the vote was? Do you remember that? It was unanimous. Unanimous. In the state of Florida, we had a unanimous vote by the Florida legislature. Incredible, right? And that, let me get back to the, let me see if I can get back to my slides here. It's always hard to go back to the slide. There we go. Yep. And it was celebrated by the governor, by lawmakers. An amazing feat, right? That we had a unanimous vote. That is the power of public interest communications. And the reason why I showed you that and I'm talking about it is because it really shows all the elements of what public interest communications is. On the Florida Wildlife Corridor's website, they talked about how the corridor, it's a place where our collective missions intersect. And that is so key, right? Where can we find agreement? We find agreement in the fact that we want to preserve the Florida way of life, and we realize the value of the land that we have. The Florida Wildlife Corridor looked at and referred to materials on the University of Florida's Center for Public Interest Communications when they were putting their communications strategy together. So public interest communications is an emerging academic discipline. We don't, and I'll talk about this in a minute, there aren't many schools or colleges that teach it. It's relatively new. Hello. All right. And the clicker is not working. All right, let me just do that. Why is the clicker not working? There we go. All right, it's back. All right, thank you. So it uses strategic communications, grounded in research and science. And this is a super important element because we borrow from cognitive linguistics, psychology, sociology to realize how people perceive messages and how they see things and the importance of shared values and the worldviews that they have. To achieve sustained and positive social change. And we talk about structural change, not just raising awareness. And that's in areas ranging from the climate crisis and healthcare access to housing policy and more. All right. So, and I've mentioned that it uses insights from cognitive linguistics and borrows from other fields. It's a big tent. And I have students in my classes from sustainability studies, from public health. There are a range of fields that students and other fields that cross and intersect with public interest communications. I'm often asked, what is the difference between public interest communications and public relations? These are the main differences. Public interest communications transcends the interests of any single organization, whereas public relations is on behalf of a corporation or an organization, right? The strategy and the communications revolves around that organization. And that's why you find in public interest communications coalitions of organizations working together because they care about the issue. We aim to motivate people to act. We seek policy change or behavior change, as in with tobacco control and public health initiatives. And we usually seek to motivate people to act, whereas public relations often is designed to raise awareness or boost a reputation and do crisis communications, things like that. Public interest communications embraces activism. Activism was not part of the Florida Wildlife Corridor campaign, but it's often part of campaigns because activism and activism tactics are communications vehicles. Whereas historically in public relations, activism has been viewed as suspect. That's changing a little bit in the public relations literature, especially as we see more corporate social responsibility and corporate advocacy, social advocacy. There's more space now for activism and other voices, but that's one of the key differences. So I said it was an emerging academic discipline. At University of Florida, we have an online master's program in mass communications with a concentration in public interest communications. We have a Center for Public Interest Communications that does projects and research for clients, including like associations and foundations. We have, and this is new as of last fall, an undergraduate track in public interest communications for public relations majors. And we have a public interest communications student association, which I believe is the only one in the country. There are just a handful of other schools around in the US that teach public interest communications. The West Virginia University has a research center. They do great work there. The University of Washington recently renamed its journalism program, Journalism and Public Interest Communication. Appalachian State in North Carolina, one of the professors who graduated from our program is teaching public relations there, and she has a public interest communications course. And Florida State University, this is interesting, they have a master's in public interest media and communication, which is very film-based. So you might wonder, well, why is this a new discipline, right? Public interest and communications has been used for social change for so long, for centuries, really. And if you look back in time, the women's suffrage movement, that was they were wonderful communicators. They had great visuals, they had wonderful messengers. They were very savvy as far as their publications. They ran an amazing communications effort. Communications was key in the child labor movement. They told stories, they had visuals. The civil rights movement as well, which is on the next screen, if my clicker can work. There we go. Right. Civil rights movement, they were amazing communicators as well, right? Martin Luther King Jr., one of the best speakers that we've had in this country, evoked emotion a lot, and they used amazing messengers and powerful visuals as well. So you might say, well, if all of these people were able to do these wonderful social movements and use communications, why do we have public interest communications? Why do students need to study it? Well, it's because now we have more research and science about how messages land, about how people perceive things, about just the cognitive linguistics and framing. So without public interest communications and without these tools, it's like swinging a baseball bat blindfolded. You'll probably hit the ball and you might even hit it out of the park, but you'll spend a lot of time swinging and missing. And with all the issues that we have, we can't afford to spend time swinging and missing. So that is why we are encouraging students and giving these tools to students and encouraging them to go into public interest work in some capacity. All right, so I mentioned activism, and I know that when we talk about activism, we often think about people holding signs and protesting. But there are many other forms of activism, and you can get really creative and get creative in ways that provide opportunities for other people to get engaged and involved without going and holding signs and protesting, because not everyone is comfortable with doing that. You can get very artistic. This is a replica of a whale made out of plastic. Greenpeace built this in the Philippines in 2017 to coincide with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit. And the idea was to pressure policymakers to limit plastic pollution, because that was one of the items on their agenda. Well, just one day later, the news media picked up on this. It went internationally. There was this international story that went around. And just a day later, the issue was included in a proposal for the next summit leaders summit. And the next year, they issued a statement and they began taking steps about limiting plastic pollution in the oceans. So that was an effective activism technique. Have you heard of craftivism? All right, I'm going to show another very short video about craftivism. All right. So another, whoops. I need to get back to the, okay. Thanks. There we go. No, it's not letting me get to my PowerPoint here. Hmm. No. We're stuck in, oh, okay. Yeah, there we go. All right. Okay. All right, there we go. So a different way of doing activism, right? There were two campaigns that they ran that were phenomenal. One involved getting Marks and Spencer board, the board that ran the Marks and Spencer department store in England, to pay a living wage to their workers. And they did that by figuring out what each of the 14 members of the board cared about and learning about them and embroidering a handkerchief for each one. Like one of them was a new mother, so they put things about babies on them and delivering them. They went to the meeting where the board was talking about issues, and they presented these handkerchiefs. And about a year and a half later, the board, and they began talking with the board. About a year and a half later, the board voted not just to pay their employees a living wage, but to pay higher than a living wage. So very effective, very effective. And the idea was they figured out what the board members cared about, what was on their mind, and used that as messaging. So different kinds of things. I'm going to show one last video, and this one is quite powerful. I think you'll enjoy it. And I couldn't embed these in the PowerPoint, which is why we're doing it this way. Can we see? All right. Thoughts, impressions about that? It's incredible, right? An organ donation campaign and a huge cultural barrier that they were able to get over by finding the common bond, the social identity of being a member of the sports team. Do you think all of the people in that stadium agreed on politics? No, but they did have one thing in common. They identified as members of this team. And that was a huge, really important bond that was core to that campaign. Let me just jump back into the PowerPoint here. All right. All right. So that brings us to how we can reduce polarization. And one of the key things is considering the worldviews and the values of those who we are trying to reach. So we know about polarization, but as human beings, we agree on a lot. This was a poll just from April of 24, an AP poll showing that there are a lot of things that people agree on. And if you look at polls around things like people want to breathe clean air and have safe water for their kids, and there's a lot that we agree on. So why then? Why are we so polarized? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Any ideas? Yes. Hmm. Right. Different messages from different places. That's key. That's definitely key. Well, in this particular AP story, they talked to an expert from Johns Hopkins, who said, well, they blamed it on the leaders. They said our leaders are not reflecting the people that they represent. The people that we represent are not as polarized. And a Pew poll also kind of backed this up when people were asked about how well Democrats in Washington and Republicans in Washington get along. They had a very dim view of how well they get along. So with public interest communications, I've talked about how we have public interest communications and how we define it in the US. At the University of Queensland in Australia, there's a professor there who teaches her version of public interest communications. I've had the pleasure of meeting her. I had a chance to go to Australia over the summer for a conference. And while we define it as a strategic communications plan with a specific goal, and we take steps to reach that goal, her version of public interest communications is much broader. It involves talking through issues, bringing lots of people together and finding the common ground, but continuing to talk until you find solutions. But there are three things that we have in common in our two different kinds of public interest communications. And the first is moving away from binaries. And by that, we mean realizing that people have complexities and nuances, right? And there are many people who will harbor progressive views on some issues and conservative views on other issues. That's called biconceptualism, and it's quite common. Second, we both aim to find shared values and use those as a starting point. And then third, we both favor active listening, which means really talking to people, finding out what they care about, finding out what their concerns are. And one example of this being put into practice during the pandemic, our Center for Public Interest Communications was asked to try and figure out a way to communicate to certified nursing assistants in nursing homes who refused to get vaccinated. How do you talk to them about getting vaccinated? And our center did research and found that sitting down and talking to them and listening to them and acknowledging their concerns and talking through those concerns was a major way to get past their hesitancy. So active listening is very key. And that's one of the things. Have you all heard of Braver Angels and Unify America? Right, the idea that bringing people together who might disagree on issues to talk through their issues and find the common ground. I've encouraged my students to do it. I've given them extra credit for doing it, and they come back and they say, we had a wonderful conversation, and it was great. But there are many challenges, as we know, right? There are news deserts. This is a map of news deserts. The lighter the color, the fewer local news outlets. So we're not even sharing the same set of facts and information, right? And because of social media and because of algorithms, we're in our bubbles, our information bubbles, and we're looking at information that we agree with, and we are fed information that we agree with. That's not helpful. So how do we address this? Where do we go? I like to take the long view, and you really have to in public interest work. The key, I believe, is it's in all of you. It's in engaging, and it's in starting at the local level and engaging people there, because so many local issues transcend the red team or the blue team. Right? If we're talking about traffic safety, for instance, or we're talking about hurricane recovery efforts, those are things where we can find common ground. And if we are working together civically and in community and in meetings together, it's a lot harder for us to insult each other when we're sitting next to each other or seeing each other on the street walking our dogs than if we're hiding behind our computer or our phone and hurling insults on social media. And in a small town like Gainesville, we have clubs and organizations where we get to know each other in different ways and in different settings that are not political at all, and we can find agreement. So I'm on a swim team here, and these are pictures from our holiday swim. We have fun, as you can see. We work out at 6 in the morning. And this team has about 50 people on it. I am sure there are many people on the team who are not registered to the same political party that I'm registered to. But I am friends with them. I know them as swim team mates. We support each other when we do races. A lot of them do triathlons. They're very supportive. If someone's relative passes away, they're there for it. We support each other, right? And so we've gotten to know each other in ways that are outside of the political venues, and we can have conversations. So the steps that we can take, the first is we can see complexities in people. This is a picture. I don't know if you all listen to NPR a lot. I tend to. This is a picture of a Mennonite couple in Pennsylvania. They run a farm, and they consider themselves traditionalists. They go to church on a regular basis. They feel they have very traditional family values. They also have electric vehicles in the driveway. They both went to Cornell, and they care deeply about the climate crisis. Not what you might expect from a conservative, a self-described conservative farming couple in Pennsylvania, right? This is where the complexities come in. And so seeing those complexities in people is really important. Other steps is reaching out to people who are not the usual supporters and finding out what they care about, what they value, and how they see the world, and seeking to understand those nuances. Also using language that invites rather than repels, which we see a lot of in social media, and building broad coalitions that empower coalition members to help craft the solutions to problems. So that's where you, the League of Women Voters, can come in. You are nonpartisan. The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan, and you have therefore credibility, a lot of credibility across the board. You can engage people and encourage them to vote and encourage them to get engaged in issues. You're already encouraging people to get engaged with the issue around GRU. And that's a perfect example of an issue that transcends the red and the blue, right? We all have the utility bills that we pay. We all have concerns about the utility. And that is a fabulous starting point. Nearly 3/4 of the people who voted on the GRU issue voted to keep it in local hands. So there's a lot of agreement there. So I think we can come up with a range of issues to engage people around and find that common ground. Just imagine the world that we could build if more people were civically engaged, if we could get people to talk to one another and come out. I believe that that's a world that we can reach and we can make happen with your help. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a comment. I think that was an excellent, excellent way to get people to really understand how we can take this polarization and make something positive come out of it and depolarize. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you for that.
Does this field have a place in getting more bipartisan behavior in our politics?
Can you tell me what you mean by bipartisan behavior?
The working across party lines.
Yes, and I think we saw an example with the Florida Wildlife Corridor project. If we can get together with people who are not what might be called the usual suspects, right? It wasn't just environmentalists who were talking to the lawmakers about the corridor. It was ranchers and farmers, and those were messengers who were very important voices for those particular lawmakers who especially were from rural areas. And that was a way of kind of reaching across that divide. I think it's much easier to do on the local level and the state level than the federal level. And I think change often comes from the local and state level and then bubbles up rather than expecting it to start at the federal level and come down.
I spent part of the day watching the Hegseth interviews with the committee.
Yeah.
And I lived in Washington for many years, so I'm more national in my perspective. I'm thinking of our Congress and how, so you think it has to be based on finding a particular problem that they can work together to overcome. I can think of a lot of problems where that's not going to happen.
It doesn't happen until it does. And it's surprising how some issues suddenly become bipartisan issues, especially when the constituents of people from both sides of the aisle are affected. One of those issues that I was really surprised, and I was in DC working on this issue at the time, was around surprise medical bills, right? The bills that you used to get if you went to the hospital and you were treated in the ER by a doctor who was not on your insurance plan and you got a $10,000 bill in the mail. Republicans were very concerned about that, as well as Democrats, and it took only a couple of years for them to get legislation passed to end surprise billing. that was something on which they all agreed. And one of the things that was key to that was elevating the stories from the people in the districts of the lawmakers who were Republicans and who sat on key committees. So that was part of the strategy as well. It's obviously, it's much harder on a federal level to make change, but it, believe it or not, it can be done. Again, my optimism showing through. I know it's difficult because the years I was a public citizen for almost 21 years, and Congress, in retrospect, when I started there, really was pretty functional. And when I left, it seems like it's kind of ground to a halt. Definitely. Occasionally it does get things done.
I have a story. I don't know if any of you ever read Malcolm Gladwell books. One of his original one was The Tipping Point, and now he has The Revenge of the Tipping Point. And I've recently read them both. And in one of the books, he talks about the Florida panther and the fact that the Florida panther was really having problems, not just its environment, the panther itself. And so they did a lot of studies, genetic studies on the panther, and they realized they were inbreeding, that they didn't have enough diversity. And so the scientists decided they should bring some cougars over from Texas. I don't know if you remember that. I remember when this happened. So they brought, and people, oh no, I mean, the sanctity of the Florida panther, we can't do this. But the scientists decided if they wanted to save it, that's what they had to do. So they brought over the Texas cougars, very similar genetics and very healthy. And the Florida panther is now thriving genetically. So his point is diversity is very important. We are stronger when we're diverse.
Thank you for that.
Hi, thanks for this. And
You're
in
welcome.
terms of narrowing the political divide, are there, all the examples you gave, were these beautiful, amazing, worthy projects, where you brought sometimes diverse people together to accomplish a goal that actually they had in common to begin with? Do you know of any forums where people with different political views can come together and hear each other in a safe zone? Is there anything like that happening? I'll just mention that in a couple years ago, there was a project called One Small Step, and it was between WJCT out of Jacksonville and StoryCorps with NPR, and they had forums for people of diverse political views to come together and talk and find commonality. But is there anything happening like that? Do you know?
I know One Small Step, Braver Angels does that, Unify America, those are national, but wow, what a wonderful thing for the League of Women Voters to do, right? That would be a great thing. I think that would be a popular thing. I think it would be a draw because I think a lot of people want to have these conversations. They just don't know how to start. And if you have a really good facilitator who can help keep the conversation going, what a wonderful project for the League of Women Voters.
I think our public library had a session a year or two ago where they invited people with different backgrounds to come and talk. I didn't go to them, but they apparently were quite successful, that people were just getting together and sharing their experiences, and they were from different backgrounds.
Well, thank you. That's encouraging. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if there's any guidelines out there for creating such a forum that the
If
league
you-
could use to pull that off.
Yes, I believe there are. If you do look on like Braver Angels or Unify America website, I think they do have guidelines. And I'm happy if you want to connect afterwards to try and help you if you're interested in putting something together and steering you towards that information.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
just one note, within my own family, I have very different views of the political scene. And the only way we've been able to handle it so far is to not discuss politics. And you're inspiring me to figure out a way that we can break that. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, it's difficult, especially when family dynamics are involved, but it can be possible to have those conversations. Any other
Now let's-
questions?
Let's give our speaker another hand, and thank you so much for a wonderful talk.
Thank you so much all for coming.